Neltharus returns as one of the dungeons for Mythic Plus in Season 4. This dungeon starts with a 33-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. Throughout this dungeon, you'll have access to burning chains, which you can click on and snap on enemy mobs to stun them and also increase their damage taken by 50% for 5 seconds. Note that the player who snapped the chains will receive a 3-minute debuff, preventing them from snapping more chains until that debuff expires. As you start the dungeon, you'll encounter 2 Karashi Wardens. These mobs will cast a frontal attack at the tank called Volcanic Guard, so avoid this at all costs. Tanks should also be prepared for the Blazing Slash from these Wardens, which will deal moderate fire damage to them. You can then decide which way you want to take on the dungeon, but for this video's sake we're going to veer left towards the first boss, Magmatusk, where you'll find 4 different types of mobs. Your tank should take notes of pulls with Kalashi Spine Crushers in, as they will knock you back with their brutal strike ability and deal big damage. Or elementals can be purged to remove their absorb shield, and they will only deal damage to your tank unless Thaumaturges turn them into molten elementals. If this does happen, it will pulse a ramping dot on your whole party with molten explosion, so you must interrupt the Thaumaturge's molten core cast. The Thaumaturges also cast Magma Conflagration, which deals targeted damage to somebody in your party, which cannot be kicked but needs to be stopped with other CC. Kalashi Plunderers will cast Explosive Concoction that will spawn orange swirlies on the floor that you'll want to dodge. Now we can take on Magmatusk. Magma Tentacle is the main mechanic of this fight, and he always starts with 2 tentacles. The longer the fight goes on, the more tentacles will grow from the boss, which is going to increase its lava spray damage by 100%, spawn more waves from Blazing Charge, and also increase the duration of Magma Eruption. He will cast Magma Lob, spawning a swirly on the ground that will leave behind a puddle of lava, which your tank will want to keep him out of at all costs, otherwise it will buff the boss's damage by 50%. These lava pools will cover a large part of the room if your group isn't positioned well, so try to bait mechanics nicely. Magmatusk will target a random player with lava spray and spray a wide cone of lava at them, dealing heavy fire damage. This cannot be dodged by the targeted player, so commit to defensive here. Periodically, the boss will also cast Blazing Charge at a random player, dealing huge damage, leaving lava pools in its path and knocking back any players in its way. It's best if your group is stacked near a wall so that you can bait the charge, and therefore it will have less of a travel time. At the end of the charge, he will release lava waves for every tentacle he has grown, which fire out across the room from him. Magma Eruption will be the main mechanic your healers will have to deal with. Upon reaching 100 energy, Magmatusk will cast Violent Mutation and erupt with big AoE damage, and then apply a dot that pulses damage every 5 seconds to all players, and this eruption will last 5 seconds longer for every tentacle he spawned. This means you need to get him down quick. After you take out the mammoth, you'll head out the room and drop down on the left ledge to avoid taking massive fall damage, and then head on over to the other side of the dungeon. The first mobs you'll encounter here are Tamed Phoenixes. They only deal damage to your tank and will be passively cleaved down due to their small health pools. Kalashi Hunters will cast Bold Ambush on a random player, dealing big damage and inflicting them with a heavy bleed for 3 seconds. If targeted here, make sure to use a defensive. They will also cast Binding Spear, which you'll need to dodge, otherwise you'll be stunned for 10 seconds and need your party to kill the spear to be released. Kalashi Trainees will cast Magma Fist, a deadly frontal cone channel that you need to dodge. They also buff themselves with 50% haste through Fired Up, which can be dispelled by Soothe classes. Kalashi Bone Tenders are stationary mobs that will spam cast Bone Toss on random party members, dealing decent amounts of physical damage that your healer will want to keep on top of. They will also cast Mending Clay, which is a high priority interrupt. Here you'll encounter a mini-boss named Overseer Laha, who has 3 main mechanics. You'll need to kick Burning Roar, which will deal damage and knock back anybody within 13 yards. Imbued Magma will deal heavy tank damage and leaves a 12-second dot that your healers will want to dispel. And finally, he will cast Eruptive Crush, which slams the ground on your tank, dealing big fire damage to all players within 6 yards, and it explodes into swirlies that your team must dodge. After this mini-boss, you'll progress onto the second boss of the dungeon, Chargath, Bane of Scales. The main mechanic of this fight is the Grounding Spear. The boss will target 3 players and throw a spear at them, dealing damage and chaining them to the floor, while also knocking them back. At this point, they'll be slowed by 40% and a puddle of lava will form at the location. Players will need to step away from the spear and create a tripwire for the tank to pull the boss through. Once the boss is tripped and broken the chain, it will deal heavy party damage through Slag Eruption, a burst of fire damage that also leaves a dot on all players for 4 seconds, and this effect can stack, so you won't want to break the chains too quickly, but healers, you'll need to be prepared for these phases. More importantly though, every time a chain is broken, the boss will gain a stack of Fetter, slowing him for 8 seconds, and after 3 stacks he will become stunned and take 50% increased damage for 12 seconds. Here is where you'll want to send your offensive cooldowns and Lust if it's available. During this, Chargath will fixate the tank with Fiery Focus, unleashing a flurry of magma attacks for 25 seconds. During this time, the boss will deal big damage to the tank until the cast ends. The tank will need to use big mitigation for this incoming damage while kiting the boss through the chains. The boss will face a random player with a Magma Wave frontal that you'll need to dodge, and Dragon Strike will deal damage to a random party member that will leave a bleed on them. Make sure to commit a defensive here, and healers you'll need to focus the player affected by the bleed. Once Chargath is down, the door will open in his room to loop you back to the third boss. Here you'll find a plethora of mobs ready to try and kill you. Kalashi Lava Bearers will cast Throw Lava, putting a swirly on the floor that should be dodged. Puddles will spawn from these swirlies as well as the mobs themselves, so be careful when you're kiting them. Lava Flares will cast Melt, which should be kicked or it will deal big fire damage to a party member. Kalashi Iron Torches will cast Motive Combustion. This must be kicked as a priority. This will leave a large dot on a random player which will also explode after it fades if it's not dispelled. Iron Torches will also cast a frontal ability called Scorching Breath, which should be sidestepped. Kalashi Bone Splitters are arguably the scariest mobs here. They will cast Pierce Marrow on the tank, dealing a hefty amount of physical damage, but they will also cast Dragon Bone Axe on a random target, which will inflict upfront damage and leave a massive bleed on that target for 10 seconds. You can stop this ability with hard CC, but if it does go through, make sure to use a defensive. The mini-boss, the Iron Torch Commander, can be easily skipped if you hug the right wall, but if you do choose to engage it, he will cast Scorching Fusillade. Your group will need to make sure to spread out for this cast so you don't cleave each other with his circles, and also commit a defensive. He'll also spawn lots more circles on the ground to dodge from the Conflagrant Battery cast. Blacksmiths will cast Forge Stomp that deals party-wide damage, and tanks will want to use a defensive for their Reverberating Slam cast, which will hit them hard and leave a dot for 9 seconds. The final mob in this area, the Forge Wrought Monstrosity, will test your healer's throughput with the aura that they have on them. Forge Wrought Fury will deal pulsing damage to your party every 2 seconds, so you'll want to burst this down as a priority mob and also use defensives here. Forgemaster Gorek. During the fight, Gorek will return to his anvil and begin casting Might of the Forge. Whenever he hammers his anvil during this phase, it will deal big group-wide damage which healers will want to really be prepared for, and once he finishes crafting, he will toss a Blazing Aegis at a random player, dealing upfront fire damage and leaving a dot for 6 seconds. This Aegis will cause a large X of orange swirlies to spawn around the player, which must be dodged, and this will happen 2 more times as it bounces to 2 additional players, so make sure to stay spread. Forge Storm will spawn even more swirlies to dodge around the room, and tanks will need to mitigate Gorek's Heated Swings combo. This deals huge damage and knocks the tank away, where he'll leap back to the tank and slam you for more physical damage and deal fire damage to anybody within 8 yards of the impact. So the rest of your group will want to stay away here. After you take down Gorek, you'll leave the same way you came in, but instead of going back down the stairs to the left, you'll continue straight. There's a few lava bearers here, but after you can jump down and cut the travel time towards the last boss of the dungeon. Before entering the last boss area, you have to take down 1 more pack filled with wardens that we've previously fought, but 2 new mobs here as well. Apex Blazewings will do some considerable tank damage with their Scolding Chomps, dealing upfront physical damage and then leaving a fire dot on your tank for 4 seconds. Occasionally, it will also cast an AoE wave called Candescent Tempest that will push you backwards and deal party-wide damage. This cannot be interrupted, so you'll want to watch for any avoidable swirlies around you. Kalashi Lavamancers have 2 major abilities to look out for. Lava Bolt will be spam cast on the tank, and they will also channel Molten Army, forming lava spawns that will also attack your tank. You want to interrupt both of these abilities at all costs. The problem is that they also shield themselves with Molten Barrier, and while this shield holds, you cannot interrupt them, so you'll want to burst this shield down ASAP, but be careful when it gets destroyed as it will explode for big AoE damage. The last boss in Neltharus, Warlord Sargha. This boss hurls Molten Gold at players. Make sure to use a defensive if targeted, as the dot hurts. Upon reaching 100 energy, this boss will begin an intermission phase, putting a massive shield on herself and pulsing increasing fire damage from Flame Eruption every 3 seconds. However, there are many ways to break the magma shield apart from just nuking it with your own damage. There are multiple objects hidden in the hardened gold on the ground that can be used to break it faster. Picking up one of these treasures will afflict you with Curse of the Dragon Hoard, a stackable 30-second dot that can be curse dispelled. Once you've broken the shield, the boss will take increased damage, so pop your offensive cooldowns and lust here. Outside of this phase, Sargha will also aim a frontal cone at the Dragon's Kiln at a random player that everybody will need to avoid. You'll also want to avoid the initial projectile from Burning Ember, which also creates burning ground at the point of impact and summons a Raging Ember. This Ember will fixate on a player with Burning Pursuit, so you'll want to kite it until it expires. But that's all you need to know for this encounter, and that wraps up Neltharus and Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.